Hey, creative commuters. I am so excited to introduce today's very, very special guest. Jayati Vora is a creative commuter by every definition you could possibly think of. She left her acclaimed job as an editor of award-winning stories to pursue more joy for herself. She's an educator who teaches kids how to love and tell stories, a woman after my own heart. And through her writing-centric show, Cutting Chai Stories, she inspires others to love writing as much as she does. As the Million Dollar Story Boss, she shows entrepreneurs and startups how to mine and polish their own golden stories. She hosts an ongoing writing party for anyone who wants inspiration, motivation, and accountability. When it comes to words, she has done or tried it all. And I've wanted to have her on the podcast for a long time, but I was honestly too nervous to ask until she asked me to be on her podcast. So, everyone, please welcome the fabulous Jayati Vora. Hi.
Hi. Oh my God, that is such a sweet and lovely introduction. And I'm so happy to be here. I was just waiting for you to ask me to be on your show. So I'm glad you did.
Well, I think it's just this sense of mutual admiration because everything that you do is gold. So I find it so fun that that's how you describe what you're doing with your newest Million Dollar Story Boss. I think it's just amazing because everything that you touch just feels like gold, and you're so beautiful with your words. And I love your podcast in every way. So I just again just mutual admiration.
Oh, you're making me blush now. Thank you.
Well, thank you for coming on the podcast today. I know that you have so many good gems to share with my audience. When we talk about the creative commute, we are talking about fueling more joy for ourselves, fueling more joy for others. And often we are holding ourselves back from doing that in so many ways. And so, you've described yourself as a recovering journalist, and you left that industry to pursue something new for yourself. And, I think especially after the last year, a lot of us can understand how someone might get burnt out on that profession. I don't know if that's what happened for you, but I think that listeners would be really interested in hearing about your experience and why you left. And,
Yeah.
maybe even like what was the experience, that moment that you knew it was time to leave that
Mhm.
industry?
Yeah. So I love journalism. I mean, I say recovering sort of half jokingly, um, because as a profession, it gave a lot of meaning to my life, and I love working with words. I love editing. I love conceptualizing stories and figuring out the best way that we can tell them. And I love being part of a team, right? When you're an editor, you're working with a writer, and you two are collaborating to make the best version of the story possible. But as I think everybody who's alive knows, journalism as an industry is flailing. And since the rise of the internet, really. And, it's been decades and things haven't gotten much better. And there is job security just doesn't really exist in this industry. Um, the you, people are being retrenched left, right, and center, and then the people who are left end up taking on a greater share of responsibilities because nobody's hiring either, right? So you have the same amount of work and you have fewer people to do it. And I'm somebody who really, really cares about work life balance. If I could, I would have like a 3-day weekend every week. And I've always been fortunate enough to like love what I do, but you also want to shut the computer at the end of the day and then go home and do something else. And so I've always been very fiercely protective of that. But actually, the impetus to leave was not so much being burned out by the profession, but just being burned out by a particular job. That wasn't healthy. It wasn't healthy for me. It was just not a healthy environment, and it was affecting my mental, emotional, physical health. And the best thing that I could do for myself to take care of myself was to just exit the situation. Sometimes you try and try and fix things or try to ameliorate things, um, but when it gets to that level, the only thing that works is removing yourself from the situation. And so I did something that I don't I don't recommend that anybody does, but I just walked into my boss's office one day and said, I'm done. Like, I quit. And the moment I said those words, it felt like a weight was lifted off my shoulders. And I know that's the most cliche way to describe it, but that's actually how it felt. I suddenly felt like I could float in the air. And that tells you something about, what a burden it was to be um, to be there. But I mean, I don't want to be all Debbie Downer about it. There were some wonderful things about that job, but at the end, I needed to leave. And I didn't have another job lined up. I didn't have anything really. I didn't have a plan. I just thought, you know what, I'm going to take a few months for myself, which I did. I traveled and I woke up late and I got massages and, I went and rejoined tango, which is something that I used to do before and sort of lost touch with for a few years, and just did things that nourished me. But even then, I thought that I was going to continue to go into business as an editor just for myself, just not working for anybody. And it was through Kathy Heller's Made to Do This program, which you and I were both part of, that this pivot happened and the shift happened. And the amazing thing was once I sort of saw what was in front of me, once I saw what people were resonating with, it's sort of like, you know when you have when you have train tracks, right? There's the grooves and the trains just go in the grooves, right? Because they're made for them. It's like fits perfectly. And it felt like once I removed that resistance of like, oh, this is what I need to do and this is my identity and this is the only way I can work with words, then suddenly all these grooves opened up that my train could go on, and it didn't um and I stopped feeling like I needed to control every aspect of what I was going to do. And people came to me and said, we love the way you teach. Can you teach our children? And it started out, with just some free sessions that I did for kids at my alma mater back in Bombay, just for fun. And then some people told other people, and then they said, hey, can you do that for our kids too? And then people say, hey, can you make this a monthly thing? And then people said, hey, can you make some time for people on the West Coast? And it just sort of ballooned from there. And it didn't matter that I didn't know where it was going, but I sort of knew, okay, this is the next step and the next step, and that's about all I can see from now, but that's fine. I'm okay to pivot. So
Yeah.
that is sort of my long answer to that question.
That's such a good answer. And I have lots of follow-up questions for you within that story. And first of all, in case anyone has not heard of you who's listening to this podcast, you are the queen of metaphor. And that train track metaphor is such a good one. It's like you can feel like that moment that your life could click into that kind of place. And how good would it feel when you're going on the train track and those tracks were made just for you and it just feels right? Like that should be what we are all aspiring to, is to feel that kind of connectedness in our lives. And so I love that. I'm going to hang on to that train track metaphor. That's beautiful. But I have a question going back to the beginning of your story. Before burnout happens, you said there were wonderful things about that job. There were wonderful things. There were things that I loved. And that makes me wonder, it just had me kind of thinking, is it the one we hang on to? Yeah, but I love this about it. Yeah, but I love this about it. And so then we start to make excuses for the stuff that is hurting us.
Absolutely, and that is exactly what happened, right? I should have left that job way before I actually did. But you have these notions, and for me, I had this notion that I wanted to produce some stories that won awards and made waves. And funnily enough, after I quit, a few months later, one of the stories that I worked on, that I commissioned and really pushed through, it ended up winning an Emmy. And then the following year, that's just because the way the award cycle happens. Like, the awards happen a year after publication
I
usually.
remember that. I was
Right.
like, this is amazing. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So it's like, so and then the other story that I felt really, really passionate about and I fought for 6 months to get commission. I mean, I really fought for that story. It was an India story, so I felt all the more strongly about it. That ended up winning a ton of awards, like a ton, a ton, a ton. And that all happened like during the pandemic, actually, like in 2020. So a full, year after I had quit. The things that I had sort of wanted in my head, which were all these external markers anyway, right? I mean, I was proud of the work before it got some external recognition. But it's funny that, you know, that recognition came after I had made the decision to leave.
Yeah. Uh, and who knows if that would have all happened if you didn't make some of those decisions. Well, I guess the train was already in motion there and you had already done the work, but that is fascinating. The timing is really fascinating. But I think a lot of people feel some kind of, what I call it, an itch, and maybe that's not the right metaphor because itches are kind of negative, but like you start to feel something and you feel it way before a lot of times we ever act. You start to feel like something doesn't feel right, or I'm feeling like I need something and I'm not sure what it is. It's time for something new, but what, how, when, all of those things. Do you, in hindsight, looking back, do you have any advice for people who might be feeling that way in their current job?
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Um, I think that we are so bound as adults, as responsible adults, to feel like we have, these bills to pay, and we have like this is the responsible, quote unquote, responsible thing to do is to stay in this job and to have the steady, the steady gig. And even if it's not satisfying us, even if it's not on this level that that I experience, but it's just that kind of itch that something is not quite fitting right, right? But one thing I've learned that was sort of a happy byproduct of like leaving with no safety net is that when you have the safety net, if you're like me, it makes it incredibly hard to leave, to do anything scary, because anything that you do that's scary that could like upset the apple cart and remove the safety net is like that safety net is like a prison, right? It's like a chain that's holding you to it because you're addicted to that salary, you're addicted to the healthcare, and I mean, these are all serious things. I'm not belittling the importance of these things, but if you're like me, and I never in my life wanted to be an entrepreneur, never. I really liked the safety and security of a steady paycheck. I liked, having the healthcare. I like being able to close my computer and go home. And, I
That's
sort of,
fascinating, only knowing the entrepreneurial side of you. That is fascinating to hear.
this is all like happening in a very compressed period of time, right? It's only been like a year and some that I've been on this journey, or that I even thought of myself this way. But I think when you have that safety net, it sometimes it won't let you do the thing. I mean, I know so many people who think that, oh, I'll do the side job or the side hustle, and then I'll have, I'll have my regular job, and then I'll do this on the nights and weekends. And how many people actually end up doing that? I feel like that's a great goal and that's a great idea, but only a very few who are extremely, extremely committed and motivated are able to make that happen, because then you just fall into the day to day of your job. And then the analogy that I like to use is like, if your cup is already full, nothing else can come in. You can't pour anything else into that cup, right? And so if your cup is filled with the day to day of your day job, which you don't love, and which is like, is like sitting on you, like, if you've ever worn wool against bare skin, like the not nice kind of wool, how scratchy it is and itchy it is. If it's sitting on you like that, then it may not be like killing you, but it's going to leave you with red marks and scratches, and it's not going to be comfortable, and it's here's the other analogy. It's like sometimes it's better for things to be broken like all the way than just a little bit, because when things are a little bit broken, we sort of limp along with them, we put off fixing them, like the light flickers, but it sort of works about 50 to 60% of the time, so we just live with it. We don't go the hassle of going to the hardware store and getting another light bulb. But when it's all the way broken and you're sitting in the dark, you're like, oh no, now I have to really get it fixed, right? And so sometimes it's easier to see things with more clarity when things are fully broken.
Wow. Also, I I have to say that you corrected me. Here's the word. Here's the editor correcting me on analogy versus metaphor, which I always like use those. I'm one of those people who just uses it interchangeably, even knowing that I'm using it incorrectly. So thank you. Thanks for totes calling that out.
I didn't mean to.
You can't help yourself. It's who
I
you
was
are.
not silently correcting your grammar as you spoke or anything like that.
I should have worn that shirt. I have one that says I'm silently correcting your grammar, but I chose my book it shirt for anyone who loves pizza and books and remembers that from our childhood. I wore my book it shirt just for this interview. But that's these are amazing analogies for those experiences, and I'm like scribbling them down as you're talking, especially if your cup is already full, nothing else can get in, and eventually it just ends up being washed together, right? It's like everything is just kind of, it's just this like you've made yourself a suicide cocktail of like, it's like you put the Dr. Pepper and the Sprite together, and now what do you have? Some weird mix of stuff, and it doesn't taste good anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Some people can keep the separation, and so definitely you have to know what works for you. But you know something that people put entrepreneurship is weird, and that some people put it on a pedestal, like it's very much like, yes, entrepreneurs, this is awesome, but it's also highly criticized. There's
Mhm.
like both sides of the coin with it, where it's like there's so many people who aren't successful, it's so hard, and so it's a difficult place to be in, and especially after leaving a job like you had that has so much notoriety. How did you overcome the idea of what some people might think when you cut the safety net?
Oh my gosh, that is actually, I think a lot of that is just to do with ego. Um, I had to overcome that because as an, as somebody who had been in this one industry for 15 plus years, who and I've worked as an editor and a journalist in India and in the US, and that becomes so wrapped up with your identity. And when you do something, when you dare to do something outside of that, there's this like, oh my gosh, what are people gonna think? And the people that you're worried about, the people that I was worried about was mostly like my former colleagues, right? Um, and so it's it's hard because sometimes you don't even know that you're telling yourself these stories. It's sometimes that you have to be challenged on it. Like, whose opinion are you worried about? And then you think about it, and you peel back the layers, and you're like, oh, why do I care what they think? I no longer, I'm working over there. The people who truly understand me and who I'm still in touch with will understand and cheer me on. And everybody else thinks this is fantastic. So, like, really, who am I trying to please? And this is more of those sort of external validation things, right? Just like the awards, and it's like the opinion of people who don't even matter to you. So, why are you bending over your backwards to please them or some imagined version of them? Most likely, they're not even paying attention to what you're doing, you know? And at the end of the day, like, are you excited to wake up in the morning and do what you do? Are you satisfied when you go to bed at night? When you're in the zone, like, do ideas come to you like water and you're just like churning them out? And if you're saying yes to all of those things, then who cares what anybody else thinks?
That's beautiful. Life shouldn't be a slog, right? We should be loving what we're doing. And I was telling her right before we started the interview that I ran downstairs and roller skated in my basement real quick before this started, because I was like, what is something that I enjoy doing that's going to fuel me in to even enjoying this interview even more than I already would? And so that was a very proactive thing that my husband is so great at reminding me of the importance of those sorts of things. And so I'm so lucky to have him in my life, and people like you who are constantly seeking the joy and seeking good things, because it is so important. And we often get stuck in, it has to be this way, it has to be that way. And like you said, we tell ourselves these stories, And everyone has a story about us, right? And that's okay. Everybody has a version of who you are, and everybody who I know has a version of who I am, but that might not be the version of who I am today, because we're always
Yeah,
changing.
absolutely. Absolutely. And we can be different things. We don't have to be stuck in this one identity, which is, the thing that I'm learning every day. Like I'm doing one thing today, I could be doing something totally different tomorrow, and they are all me, you know.
Yes. Yes, that's okay. I just I feel like that is a real challenge right now. That's a real challenge, and I think also with social media and the fact that we can see who everybody is all the time, that if suddenly somebody changes, it's very striking, like, wait, I
Hmm.
thought they were this, and we all do that because we're always trying to wrap our minds around what something is. That's our human nature, right?
Hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
okay, another thing, a logical fear. A logical fear when somebody cuts that safety net that you talked about is money. A day job gives you a steady paycheck. You know what's coming day to day. So, what say you about money?
So, okay, I did have a little bit of a safety net. I was doing this part-time job, also a journalism and teaching job, um, that went through, that I had all of last year. So that was, something that was a few hours a week. So I knew that I had some amount of money coming in. And I also have a wonderful husband who supports me. And so, it's not like I was terrified that I wouldn't make the next month's rent. So I did have a safety net in that sense. Um, what I meant was just that I didn't have my next thing lined up, and I didn't, and the and the income, to be honest, has been very fluctuating. In the beginning of the pandemic, people really, before sort of Zoom fatigue set in, people really wanted to connect and see each other's faces. And so there was a lot of opportunity for what I do. And in the summer, especially with the kids stuff, parents were at a loss. Like, what do we do with these kids? And so there's a class that they enjoy, and they're learning something, and they're having fun. And, so I had more business than I had to turn away so many people because I just couldn't accommodate them. And so, there has to be some sort of appetite for that kind of fluctuation. And it's scary. I won't lie. It's so scary. It's so scary to, like, have it swing wildly. But, as my coach asked me, like, what would you do if your son's life depended on it? Like, what would you do if you were solely responsible for paying the household expenses next month? And you know what? When you feel the stakes like that, you get so resourceful, and you, like, you end up, like, maybe you stay awake till midnight, and maybe you, like, put out 5 offers instead of one, because you're just going to swing for the fences and see what sticks. Oh my god, I'm mixing up my I'm mixing everything up. You're throwing spaghetti at a wall and see what sticks. That's the one I want. But you just try a lot more, and then there's no room in your head for ego and the fear of failure, because you're just like, I've just got to do it. There's no other option. And there's no guarantee. Even if you do every single thing, you may not get what you want at the end of the day, or you may not get it right away. But so much of this is just sticking with it and persevering, and not giving up. And I'll say, like, the creative commute, like the Facebook group, your podcast, everything that you do, so much of it has been just being consistent and being there. And so everybody knows now what the creative commute is. Anybody who's associated with you, who's heard of you, and they know what they can get by coming to your group. And I think that if you at some point said, oh, this is too hard, or, oh, I don't know where the next, what next month is going to bring, and quit, then you wouldn't have had that. You wouldn't have had this wonderful community.
Yeah, that's so true. That consistency is just as much for me as anyone. There's been a few times where I experimented, maybe stepping back because I think, oh, am I doing too much? Is this too much? But I've realized that consistency is for me because it's what I enjoy doing. And so I'm
Yeah.
showing up with the things that I like doing and that are helping to fuel me. And
Yeah.
using that as my guiding light has been the most successful thing. And I notice that that's when it seems like the really good things are happening and everybody's having a great time in there, is when I'm feeling like I'm getting joy out of what I'm doing and I've got that consistency. Not a naturally consistent person, so it has really helped me personally be more consistent.
That's awesome. But yeah, that's exactly it. It's like you feel that joy and you transmit that like just in your energy.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I I have a question for you. Your son, how old is he, and his is he a writer?
He is now. So he used to he's been doing my classes too, but he's always loved stories and listening to stories and telling stories. And this is a fun game for anybody who has kids, or actually even if you don't have kids, but you are weird like me. Um, we play a game called DIY stories that we've been playing since he was like 4 or something, where one you play with somebody else and one person starts a story and then the other person continues it, and then you keep on going and you just pass it back and forth, and it's so fun and it's great for killing time in like long car rides or the airplane when we can sit in airplanes again. And so he always loved he always loved telling the stories. But I think like any child who's learning how to write and who's like writing is laborious because they're not used to it, the hand-eye coordination. So he used to hate writing. And I'm glad to say that after doing these classes with me, and being able to write stories about transformers and dragons, which is like what 7-year old, at least my 7-year old, is into right now, you know then that motivation, right? Because you're enjoying the process so much, then it overcomes the annoyance with like how slowly you scratch out letters. And so now I would say he's a writer.
I love that. I also love that there's such a good nugget in there that when you're enjoying the process, it doesn't matter what you're doing because you're enjoying the thing. So, how can you bring something that you love into whatever that task is that you have to do? So, okay, you teach children to write. Do you have any funny stories, funniest thing a kid has ever written, shared about, any good moments?
Oh man, I mean they surprise me every week, and I don't know that I remember off the bat because like just one thing that stands out. But I think what I love about it, and I think what they love about it, is that we can all be silly. I feel like I, I don't know. I'm not a teacher by profession. I haven't trained. But I show up in those sessions just as I am now, but maybe a little sillier. And that gives them permission to just be their naturally silly, funny selves. Um, so, the other day I was teaching a group of kids who had come on right after their online school ended, and you could see that they were sort of like tired. They were just mentally not there. And I said, I don't want to start class with this kind of energy. I want you to be excited and I want you to have fun, and I want your brain to be turned on. And so I just turned on a song and I said, everybody get up and dance. And I shared my screen or shared the computer audio, and I like made everybody, and they were like 10. So they were at this moment where they're starting to feel self-conscious. Like the 7, 8-year-olds don't care. Like they'll do anything. Right. But the older they get, the more self-conscious they get. And they're like, oh, I don't want anybody to see me. I want to turn off my camera. I'm like, no, everybody stand up. I'm watching you. Like I put them on the spot. I'm like, get up right now. I want you to dance. And you do things like that get into your body that make you feel silly, and then when everybody's being silly together, then you don't feel so self-conscious about it. And honestly, being silly is like, we talked about this, Jen, and when you came on Cutting Chai Stories. But I think it just like releases something in you, and it's like with the roller skating, man. I wish I had I wish I could roller skate around. um, but doing that and getting into your body and just feeling loose, it just turns off that worry gene, and then you're just in the moment.
Yeah. Well, and by nature, as human beings, we all want to be part of something. We all want to be part of the community. We all want to know that that people around us, that what we're doing is okay. And you are giving them permission with their peers to all be silly together. in the way that you and I give each other permission to be silly in what we're doing out there in the world. Surrounding yourself with other people who are embodying that side of things just makes you feel more comfortable doing it. And then more and more and more. And that's how we can create a world where we're all focused on building these positive feelings for ourselves, which I just love everything that you do and everything that you're sharing here about this. Okay, tell us what Cutting Chai Stories means for those who don't know. That is the name of your podcast. What is Cutting Chai?
So cutting chai is basically a half serving of tea. And in India, we make the tea milky and sweet, and usually there are a lot of masalas like spices in them. And so there's a full cup of chai, and cutting chai is a half cup of chai, and you get it at these tea stalls on the road. You get them in you have these chai walas who come around to offices and with a hot kettle of freshly made tea and serve it out. You get it on trains, so it's very down to earth. It's very like comforting. My memories of having cutting chai are like having it in the monsoon, which is roughly around the time that is summer here in the US, and torrential rain, right? And then you curl your hands around this hot cup of cutting chai. And so for me, like that's the equivalent of like my comfort food. And that's just what I wanted. That's just what I wanted to people to feel when they came into my space, is like felt held and safe, and that there's no judgment, and you can be comforted and tell stories. And the podcast is a writing centric podcast. I have guests on like you. um, Sometimes they're guests purely from the creative writing world. They are authors, they are journalists, they are editors, they are translators, they're poets. And sometimes they talk about business writing, and my podcast does both. And I always give a writing prompt at the end, so anybody who needs some inspiration, um, I have plenty to give away.
It's a fabulous resource for any writer or anybody who's interested in writing. You have so many different episodes about all of the things, and with lots of different tips, and really, really practical sometimes, but then also really creative and fun. And your guests are all really interesting. So I highly suggest that everyone goes and checks out her podcast. Okay, my final question for you, and it's a question I like to ask everyone, and I gave you no preparation for it because I just want whatever comes off the top of the top of your head. Where is the magic in the world to you right now?
Oh my gosh, where is the magic in the world? It's in unexpected things. It's in the other day, I'm away from home right now. I'm in Vermont for the week, and we have, where we're staying, there's this backyard where there's this like really old walkway, and there's moss growing on it. And as we were coming home the other day and we pulled up, there it was the golden hour, which is the hour at sunrise and sunset, where the rays of the sun are slanting sort of sideways and not directly overhead, and it just makes everything look beautiful. And the sun rays were striking the moss in such a way that they seemed golden. Like they really seem golden. And if you see them now, they're like dull, lifeless green. They're not like the vibrant green. Anyway, so the sun's rays were hitting it, and I just looked at it and I was like, wow, this is the yellow brick road, you know? And it's in moments like that, like when you see something in a different way. And sometimes it can be like literally seeing something in front of you, like with your eyes, or just experiencing it. Sometimes somebody says something and it just clicks, like something shifts, like what you said about the train tracks, it connected with you in some way. And then it just changes the way you think of something. And I love those moments where it feels like, a lock and a key, and suddenly like everything just like fits and it clicks into place, and then it just shifts everything. And so yeah, I love those moments.
Of course, you had the most beautiful response to that. That is amazing. But perspective is everything, right? And there's beauty in everything, and it's all in how you look at it, when you look at it, how you're feeling when you look at it completely shifts the way that we see
Absolutely.
things.
Absolutely. And it's also like where you are in that moment. Like my husband was right next to me. He didn't see it. I saw it. And I made him stop the car and get out so I could take a picture. And the caption that I put on the picture was, viewed in the right light, anything can be a yellow brick road, which is just what you said. It's all about the perspective.
That's amazing. We could not end this podcast on a better, I'm clicking my pen closed. That was amazing. Thank you. Where can people find you right now? Where's the best place they can find you?
I have a Facebook group called Cutting Shy Stories. I have a podcast. We just ended season 2. I'm on Instagram. But the new thing that I'm doing, which I think people might find really fun, is a monthly membership for anybody who feels stuck in their writing, anybody who wants community, accountability, motivation. I don't have a name for it yet. Jen, maybe you could help me and we could come up with like a fun and silly name.
Would love to.
Yeah, but it's just something that's no stress, and I want to bring that joy of storytelling to people, whether it's creative writing, whether it's journalism, whether it's business writing, any and all of the above. Just a space for community and writing.
I love it. And I love that you're continuing to chase that joy and riffing and coming up with new ways in order to help people. And that sounds fabulous. So everyone, please go follow her podcast on Instagram so that you can be in tune with all of the latest updates on that, because I'm sure there are some listeners to this podcast who would benefit greatly from being part of that community. So thank you so much for joining today. This was so fab. I just love talking with you, and enjoy the rest of your time with your family in Vermont.
Thank you so much, Jen. It was such a pleasure.